So this is a bit of a special edition of Dave's Head. No intro, no grin, just my guess. Days ago, the conversation that you're about to hear took a very different shape. My guest and I had just finished discussing the long struggle for freedom, human rights, and democratic change inside Iran. But history doesn't wait for podcast schedules and the order that I had things. Since that conversation, the United States and Israel launched strikes against or inside of Iran while, ironically, diplomatic talks were happening um, in Geneva. Iran has responded with missile attacks across the region and even closing the Strait of Hormuz, I believe is the pronunciation. Civilian casualties are already being reported, including a school where a bunch of young girls were attending, sadly. U.S. service members have been killed. Flights across the Middle East have been disrupted. I personally know someone who went to the Middle East for a doctoral program, landed, been stuck, and fighting to get back ever since. And I think she's still at this moment not on her way back. Oil prices, probably the least of all the things I mentioned, least important to me anyway. Oil prices are rising, and the world is once again holding its collective breath as yet another war unfolds. And moments like these, a lot of times, demand headlines, um, but I think they more so demand perspective. And so, this episode, like last episode, if you tuned in, thanks for tuning in again. We're bringing back someone I think is uniquely positioned to help us understand what's happening, not just geopolitically, but humanely, which is the most important. Zolal Habibi is an Iranian human rights activist for more than 25 years of advocacy for political prisoners, women, and freedom seekers inside Iran. Her life's work has focused on exposing repression inside the country and amplifying the voices of those fighting for democratic change. But today's conversation happens under very, very different circumstances than just a week or week and a half ago, because war has begun. And so Zalal has returned to the show to help us make sense in the whatever definition of that is possible right now of what this exact moment means for the Iranian people, for the region, and for the world. So Zalal, welcome back to Dave's Head. Normally, the way I finish my introductions is I say, "How's it going?" Um, we just had a moment about a couple minutes ago where we both said, "How's it going?" and we're just, I don't know how it's going, but I'll ask anyway. How's it going?
As you just said, we are in very turbulent times right now, and there we are in a very critical situation. I think historically, it's one of those points in history that um, the decisions we make today can impact the entirety of humanity
Mhm.
and the world and the future. So it is a very critical juncture that we're in. Um, but it's, I think, important to also be able to navigate through it and understand it and try to, you know, push forward in the right direction to the extent that we can and to try to understand it so we can impact it. I think that's something that's really important. And because usually in these situations, we think that the situation is so much larger than us that we tend to become just bystanders and
Mhm.
watching from afar. But there's, I think, a lot that we can do to try to, I guess, set things in a right path.
Yeah, I'm looking down because I'm trying to look at the exact number of days. We spoke just 9 days ago, 10 days ago, something like that, and we were focused and discussing the long struggle for freedom, like I said in the introduction for you, inside of Iran. And now the country is at war. And so the first question I have is, what was your first reaction to hearing that there were strikes inside of Iran by the joint effort of the U.S. and Israel?
Well, the first was, I think, a bit of the shock to see, like, oh no, what is going to happen, and how is this going to unfold? For us, it was about like 7:30 in the morning when we
Mm.
first got the first news that there has been like I think it was a missile fired at first, but within a few hours, things just started to take off. But as I mentioned in our I'm glad that we did have the previous conversation, but as we pointed out last time, for us as the Iranian resistance and as the Iranian people, we don't see war as a solution to the
Mm,
crisis in Iran. In fact, we have said for over 2 decades that neither war nor appeasement are the solution to the situation in Iran. And unfortunately, the policy of appeasement does eventually lead to a war. And this isn't just our experience, like what we're seeing right now, but even if you go back in history, like World War II, it was the same thing. It was, the policy of appeasement was taken forward to an extent that they reached a point that it was already too late and there was no other
mhm,
path ahead of them. And right now, I mean, this is the juncture that we're in. Um, the reality is that we still think that change, like that true change, will come about by the people of Iran. Democracy can't be installed in a country, and to be honest, all of these, efforts, it's not necessarily going to lead to regime change.
yeah.
Yes, Khamenei has been eliminated, but the system, that apparatus, is still there, and that is something that's important to note. And right now, I mean, when you enter a war, you can't just look at this side of the coin that, well, Khamenei has been eliminated or this or that high-ranking official in the regime has been, killed. You also have to look at the casualties. You have to look at, the repercussions of this war. Right now, we see that, the civilian lives lost. We are seeing how the Iranian regime has retaliated, and now practically most countries in the region have been targeted, and
Mm,
as far as Cyprus even. So it has taken, it has expanded like very fast in a span of a few days. Today is day 6 of the
mm,
war, and we're already at this, state. And I think it's really important to understand that, unfortunately, I mean, I don't think countries are just going to sit by and allow their, countries to be bombed or attacked or whatnot without any kind of reaction. So this is turning into, a avalanche in itself. And I think that's something that's important to understand.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, so that is where we are right now. Um,
So
yeah.
yeah, so to follow with that, so I know you spent years advocating for the Iranian people and criticizing the regime, and rightfully so. Um, we see reports, depending on the station you turn on, either cheering for this or um, just heartbroken over what's happening. But from your perspective, how are Iranians themselves processing and reacting to this moment?
I think that even among Iranians, it's a mixed feeling. I think that you saw people who were, joyful over the fact that Khamenei has been eliminated, but on the other hand, many who are very weary of, a foreign war in their country, and because they understand the implications of war. Iran had an 8-year war with Iraq, so they have that experience, and they also understand the complexity of the Iranian regime. So I don't think people want to see a war, but right now, I mean, it has already started. So, and unfortunately, they weren't the deciding force in the mix of this, and so that is why right now, I mean, it is very difficult to be able to have a full understanding of how the people of Iran feel right now, because in the past 5, 6 days, internet and communication lines have been cut off again. So
Mhm.
there's very little information coming out of the country. And yeah, so we have to, I guess, wait and see what does happen. But right and for now, I mean, just the destruction. I mean, just look at how many places in Tehran were attacked today. Um, People were already living under very difficult circumstances, and now that has been, increased. And so people are just right now trying to take shelter and safeguard their families and their loved ones. Um, During the war, you can't really do anything else. So that is what takes priority in this
Mhm.
situation.
Yeah, before, and I mentioned on the opening that before the strikes, the U.S. and Iran were in talks in Geneva about Iran's nuclear program. And a bit of a long question here. The U.S. Director of National Intelligence had testified here, I believe, last month, um, that the intelligence community, or IC, believed Iran was not actively building a nuclear weapon. But Trump himself justified this war by saying Iran was an imminent threat, meaning, for those out there, imminent threat means imminent attack, whether it's some sort of war based attack or a terroristic based attack. That's the overall definition that gets put under imminent. And so, two part, um, does that confliction internally in the U.S. government that there's no threat or not actively building a nuclear weapon, and Trump saying imminent threat, do those two things, how do you feel about those two things? And then also, what do you think changed so suddenly to be in negotiations, wherever that was going to go in Geneva, but to go from there to war while those things were happening? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think that first of all, I think that statement was not very a informative statement
Hmm.
that Iran is not a threat and that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear program. That's not true. And there are plenty of facts to prove otherwise. And the fact that the regime is actually pursuing a nuclear weapons program because it sees its existence um, linked to it. Otherwise, in the past 20 something years, I mean, it's been 24 years since the NCRI first revealed Iran's nuclear program. Um, I guess from the first major revelation. Before that, we had done it too. So, like 30 years actually, that we have spoken about Iran's nuclear program. But the turning point being in August of 2002, when Natanz and Araf were announced. Um, the Iranian regime has, gone to great extents and paid a heavy price for the continuation of this plan. And time and time again, the world has seen that, they it's much further than what they imagined once that information comes out. So the fact that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon, that's not true. It is. And that it's not a threat, yes, it is a threat. The Iranian regime is a threat, and it will be a threat till the day that it exists, because that's the nature of this regime. It it can only stand by turning to, terrorism and fundamentalism abroad, and internally in warmongering abroad, but internally with suppression. So that is the reality of this regime. Um, why did negotiations turn to war? That is something I think that the future will have to foretell. We weren't in those rooms. We don't know what was discussed. But the
Hmm.
reality is that um, from day one, when they started the negotiations too, um, the negotiations weren't in regards to what had actually happened in January in Iran, the massacre of the Iranian people, the mass killings, none of that. It was in regards to Iran's nuclear program and missile program. So um, that was the context of it. The reality is that the Iranian regime has really done everything in its power to keep itself afloat, and that has come at a great price for the people of Iran. Right now, the reality is that people of Iran um, have turned reached a point of no return in regards to this regime, especially after January. And the people of Iran, what you're seeing on the ground in the streets, I think that's what's really important. You see an active force on the ground acting against the regime. Everyone saw in the first weeks of January the uprisings in Iran, and the fact that these people were that brave to stand in front of this regime despite knowing going to the streets will cost them their lives, but they still did so, and with open eyes. Um, and the reality is that the regime has been talking about this for a while now, that
Mhm.
it is impossible for them to escape being overthrown. And I think that despite the regime's bloody crackdown, it is clear both to the regime and to the people of Iran that the people of Iran would return with a far stronger force against this regime um, in weeks to come. And that was something that we were seeing actually a few days before the war started. I mean, about the Monday before the war started, we had actually since the Saturday before the war started, we had the universities were opened again because
Mhm.
from the uprising till that week, all classes were being held online and all universities had been shut down. Um, that Saturday is the first day of the week in Iran, so they
Mhm.
started having classes, and that first day, protests started growing in throughout the universities in Iran. So for the whole, actually from Saturday till Thursday, we witnessed 5 consecutive days of protest and throughout universities throughout all of Iran. And the regime had to take back its statement and was like, okay, classes are going to be online again. No more, you know, try to prevent, creating atmosphere where people could come and protest against the regime, and because the regime was really afraid of this taking off, and you know taking on all of society again. We
Mhm.
saw the anniversaries that were being held across Iran for the 40th day of mourning of those who had been killed. The fact that people used that opportunity to come to the streets and you know to show their opposition to the regime and their resistance in face of this regime. And I think that the fact that, I think everyone was very startled and shocked by seeing the videos of, families who turned those mourning ceremonies to celebrating the lives of their children and, making pledges to continue their path. So unlike what the regime intended, that they could spread complete fear in society with such mass killings, that those killings turned to rage and turned to, um, you know, people being more determined to overthrow this
Mhm.
regime because otherwise this cycle of death isn't going to end. And then we saw last Monday, I mean, 5 days before the start of the war, so the Monday, not not this Monday, but the Monday before it, we saw 250 members of resistance units in Iran carry out a organized attack targeting the headquarters of Khamenei, the same place that was targeted on Saturday. 5 days before that, it had been targeted by the resistance units, and that was a operation unprecedented in the last 2 decades. So um, things were going in this direction
Mhm.
by the people of Iran who have come to the streets now with a new resolve to overthrow this regime. People understand because of what they experienced in January and also the history of this regime that this regime is not going to just, step aside
Yeah.
due to protest. It's going to be a very bloody um, fight, and the regime will do everything to keep itself afloat and will be brutal. And the people of Iran realize now that, um, you know, there comes a time that really there is no other way than to take up arms and to resist and to fight back and to defend yourself in face of the suppressive forces. And that is what we are seeing in Iran on the ground. Even in the last few days, we have seen, like, for instance, in Hashgerd and Karaj, resistance units attacked a barrack of the regime, and they were able to disarm those forces and arm the people to be able to protect themselves. Or, like, for instance, in Marivan and Mahabad, there were attacks on prisons of the regime, and the people were able to actually have some of the detainees from the protests and some of the political prisoners released. And, we are seeing these acts of defiance throughout Iran. Unfortunately, due to the internet
Mhm.
disconnect right now, we don't have all of those information, but that is happening on the ground. And here and there, we are getting bits of pieces of it. Maybe not the full picture of it, but this is something that is happening. And I think it's really important to understand, like in these circumstances right now, I mean, um, the Iranian resistance has stepped to the plate and has said that, first of all, the Iranian people are the only legitimate power to bring about this change. And because if you want to actually have mm, the threat of the Iranian regime removed, that means it's overthrow, complete overthrow.
Yeah.
And that has to be done by the people of Iran. So the Iranian resistance has stepped up to the plate and has stated that, we are willing to take on that responsibility as we have, and we will continue to do so. The National Council of Resistance of Iran has announced a provisional government for the transferring of sovereignty to the people of Iran and establishing a secular democratic republic based on the 10-point plan set forth by Mrs. Rajavi. And was announced on Saturday. And this
So,
has a history behind it because the plan for the interim government was put together or set forth in October 1981. And finally, we have reached the day that, it is time to implement it.
mm,
And
yeah.
this is where we currently stand. Um, I think that, you know, a full-fledged war or a, longer war is going to be devastating for everyone.
Mhm.
Um, and nothing good is going to come of that. So it's really important to realize that the Iranian people have that capability and that potential to be the ones to bring about this change. And right now is the time to do so and allow the Iranian people to bring about that change. And I think one of the beautiful things that we have been seeing, especially in the last month, we have been seeing a lot of like unity among the different opposition forces, Iranian opposition forces,
Mhm.
from like, for instance, the different ethnicities of Iran, to the National Council of Resistance of Iran, and to different groups coming together, or like for instance, among the Kurdish ethnicity of Iran, there are I think about like 7 different organizations. Well, 5 of them have created a coalition together. That is something that is a positive step forward.
Mhm.
Or like for instance, we see right now even and among the diaspora, like for instance, we had a demonstration um, in Berlin last month, and we had representatives from about 16 different organizations and groups who were in attendance and were there in solidarity, and everyone under one umbrella with one message that you know, we want a secular democratic republic in Iran and having a firm stance against all forms of tyranny, be it
Mhm.
the Shah or the mullahs. So that is like the unifying force right now among Iranians. And I think that it's really important to understand this current these current circumstances and what can come from it, and
Mhm.
to be able to start backing that as the solution to be able to pull out of the current crisis. Because, um, as I said, war, especially, we are seeing it's not right
Hurts
now
everybody.
that they're targeting specific places. It's just,
Mhm.
throughout the country. And then there's Iran's retaliation, and then it's spreading to different countries and whatnot. So
Mhm.
this isn't something that you want prolonged. So it needs to stop. But also need to understand that the solution now is to put an end to the policy of appeasement in all its forms and allow the people of Iran to take their destiny into their own hands.
Yeah, no, well, last time we talked about hope and how powerful that is, and one of the offsprings of hope is unity. Um, and so it's a good thing to hear that the coalition. You said 5 of 7, but that's a big percentage of that seven are coming together to coalesce and unify the resistance. I wanted to take a step back for 1 second. You talked about the schools, and um, there's reports on, I believe it was on Saturday, the first day, that a school was hit, and the numbers, rough numbers in my head, I think it was 150 young,
150, yeah,
yeah, 150
young girls.
young girls, and another 100 or so injured. Reports, and again, the information is scattered from where it's come from and who's responsible. But the sources that are coming out saying that it was a U.S. missile that may have hit the school. How concerned are you? And you talked about the longevity of war not benefiting anyone and hurting the people of Iran, or excuse me. How do you what do you think about um, the citizens of Iran bearing the brunt of this as this war continues, as this regime continues to fire missiles and drones to keep itself relevant and powerful? How concerned are you about the citizen impact?
Concerned about that, and that's actually one of the main concerns that we have, and that's why I think first of all it's very important to differentiate between the people and the regime.
Mm,
But the reality is that this regime is willing to sacrifice, all of the people of Iran to keep itself afloat. I mean, Khomeini used to say, "We will continue war till the last house standing in Tehran," and right now the regime has the same you know, mindset.
mm,
So that's really important to understand. I mean, this regime is not a regime that will, you know, um, change its direction for the sake of its people, because it could care less about its people. I mean, a regime that kills its own citizens on the street in broad daylight, by the thousands, it doesn't really care about the casualties of war. In fact, here in the mix of things is trying to play the victim card and also the hero card. So the hero of all of the countries who have been, targeted by Western governments and this and that. So it is pushing forward that messaging and also playing the victim card that, yeah, we were unjustly attacked and this and
mm,
that. And it's us against the world. And they are comparing themselves to like David and Goliath and whatnot. So this is um, this is something that the regime lives on. And so it's really important to understand that. But also, I think what is really important for the international community to understand is that a true solution relies on the people of Iran to create that. It's otherwise, I mean, we have, I think right now, and if you look in the past 2 decades, I think the US has experienced enough wars to know that it's not going to end well.
yeah.
In either method, be it like a shorter war, it might have like some short-term results, but it's not going to have a positive long-term result. So it's really important to have those understandings and put things into perspective, and to also understand that you have to understand Iran is very different geopolitically than other countries in the region. That is something that has shown itself in the last 6 days. The fact that within 6 days it has, I think on day three or maybe even earlier, the regime started targeting other countries, neighboring countries, and this is like now they say there was a directive given by Khamenei before he died or something like that, that he had told the Revolutionary Guards and whatnot that you have open hands to fire at whatever given country if we are attacked and need to retaliate. And so um, this is how the regime creates chaos, and then they try to pull themselves out of the mess through the chaos that they create in the region. So um, with that, you have to understand that that experience exists with the Iranian regime. It has always been the destabilizing force in the region. So right now, it's really important to concentrate on the people of Iran and what it is that they are striving for and how they think that it should come about. And yeah, I think that that is key. And also, we have to understand that the people of Iran do have the negative experiences that come with foreign intervention in the past century, from Reza Khan to Mohammad Reza Shah to the coup d'etat against Mossadegh to Khomeini coming into power. So that is not something that they want to sign up for. And I think that's something that the world needs to pay more attention to, um, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are on the ground and they're the ones who will be setting, you know, setting the new um, circumstances, I
Yeah.
guess you could say.
So you touched on a little bit about this already spreading to neighboring countries, but how concerned are you about this spreading not just to neighboring countries, but the Russia, the Chinas, the other nations in the world getting to this, in effect, a de facto World War III, coming from this? There's been repercussions outside of this area already. You talk about crude oil prices and airline disruptions and things like that. Economic uncertainty. I haven't looked at the stock market in the U.S. Recently, the last couple of days, but I imagine it's been impacted as well. But I guess two part. How worried are you about other nations outside of the local area getting involved, and globally the global impact of this going forward?
I think that the global repercussions will be high, but I don't think that Russia and China are going to get themselves involved because they really don't have much at risk, or
Mhm.
I think they would prefer to just stay out of it. Um, but I do think that the repercussions can reach, if further than what they have already. The Iranian regime and its state-run media, they have been making threats in the past few days that they plan on targeting Albania,
Mm.
because Albania is home to the Iranian resistance, and the regime always, in these circumstances, fears them the most and sees them as the, you know, most viable alternative, but also the greatest threat to its existence. And so they have issued threats of missile attacks on the MEK bases in Ashraf 3 in Albania. So that is something that, we are seeing. Um, once it If the regime does act against Albania, Albania is a member of NATO, so NATO will be getting involved. As we are also seeing that, like for instance, right now in regards to Cyprus, France and some other countries have said they might be getting involved. So, it is taking on dimensions that I don't think anyone had taken into consideration. So that is why it is very concerning, about the extent of it and how, this is going to play out. Um, and yeah, so I think that all the parties involved, they need to take those things into consideration and to um, understand the repercussions of what
Yeah.
is
The
happening
ripple
right
effect.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that actually, on the first day of this war, Mrs. Bajavi gave a statement, which to me, I think that it really put a lot of things into perspective because it was addressing both the people of Iran, but also the international community. I'd be more than happy to like read it for you. It's like 2 minutes, I think, but I think that it'll give your audience a understanding of like how is it that Iranians are seeing this and how we need to like be able to move forward with it. Um, due to
Yeah.
these very difficult situations. Her message reads, "Dear compatriots, our homeland continues to endure greater pain and destruction under the rule of religious fascism. In these difficult circumstances, I call on all of you, especially the courageous youth of our country, to care for civilians and the general public, particularly children and the elderly, protect them and help one another. Now is the time for solidarity. Our strength lies in the unity and cohesion of our people against the religious dictatorship and the remnants of monarchical fascism that seek to steal the democratic revolution. At this critical moment, I call upon our compatriots and all forces of Iran's democratic revolution to remain vigilant and prepared. And the war that has erupted today over the clerical regime's nuclear and missile programs that the Iranian resistance exposed 3 decades ago, all parties involved must exercise the utmost care to prevent any harm to the Iranian people and to the country's civilian infrastructure. I call on the public at large, especially supporters of the resistance, the youth in resistance units, the members of the Liberation Army, and all awakened women and young people to rush to the aid of those affected. I reiterate that the ultimate solution is the overthrow of this regime and the determination of Iran's destiny by the Iranian people and the organized resistance, by the brave sons and daughters of the nation in the resistance units and the ranks of the Liberation Army. Our path leads toward the future and the establishment of a democratic republic, not a return to the buried dictatorships of the past. Based on the 10-point plan announced for the transfer of sovereignty to the people of Iran, the National Council of Resistance of Iran announced the provisional government. The precedent for such a provisional government dates back to October 1981. I call on patriotic personnel in the armed forces to stand with the Iranian people, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, and other forces tasked with preserving the regime must lay down their arms and surrender to the people. I declare to the international community that only the people of Iran possess the legitimacy to determine the political future of their country. Iran is not its regime, Iran is its people. No future for Iran can be realized from the outside. It can only be built by the Iranian people themselves. I call on all to support the Iranian people. As the Iranian people demonstrated during the January uprising, they seek a future based on a democratic republic and reject both the Shah and the mullahs. Our homeland has passed through many turbulent periods. It will pass through this moment as well, but within the People's Front, we must choose unity, solidarity, and hope, and be prepared to pay whatever price is required. Long live the people of Iran, victory to Iran's democratic revolution.
That sounds like leadership. Um, and, thinking about leadership, the world in a blink of an eye has gone from diplomacy to missiles and war. And thinking about that statement, thinking about leadership, thinking about a end goal of a year from now where the bombs have stopped, hopefully. And hopefully this is now the Democratic Republic of Iran. How do you see that coming to fruition? What does that leadership look like, and how is that infrastructure set up?
Actually, that is like the one thing that we have to look forward to is and it's something that I think we have a very very vivid image of that, of what that could um behold and what it represents. Um I think that the 10-point plan presented by Mrs. Rajavi, many have called it Jeffersonian over the years, and it has garnered a great amount of support internationally. Over 4,000 lawmakers across Europe and the US, Middle East have supported it. It has gained the support of about 140 former heads of state, 100 Nobel laureates. And when you look at it, every point in the 10-point plan, it you feel like it sets up like a guideline of like what Iran should look like. And there isn't a single one that people disagree on usually, but it's very, very balanced. So like it closes all those other things that might take it in the wrong direction. So it's in itself, it's a guarantee to be able to have a democratic republic. I mean, the fact that the first is, the only criterion is the ballot box and setting that forth. And then, having free elections and it is also against, any form of hereditary rule or whatnot. And so that's really important for Iran. the second, like for instance, guaranteeing everyone's freedoms, um, from freedom of speech, assembly, all of it, to even freedom of having access to the internet, which are all key in our society today. Um, or like for instance, the third one, it calls for the abolition of the death penalty in all forms of torture. I mean, in a country where people have suffered so much by the hands of this regime, that's really important, because it prevents another cycle of like revenge and killings and whatnot. And I think that is very key, especially coming from the people who have been the main victims of this regime over the generations. So when they say, "Look, it has to stop," there isn't anyone else who can say, "No, I've suffered too much." To allow it to just the regime to get away with it or not be killed or something like that. But so
Mhm.
I think that's really important. Or like for instance, when it talks about independent judiciary, uh, that is key to creating a democracy. Um, being gender equality, the rights of minorities, ethnicities, religious minorities, all of it. I think they are part and parcel of this whole process of creating a democracy. And it calls for non-nuclear Iran and a Iran that is in peace and harmony with its neighbors. And I think that is very important. And in fact, this movement was the first to reveal Iran's nuclear program because they opposed Iran having a nuclear program because they understand the implications it could have and the repercussions that it can have because and also Iran is a very rich country in natural resources. It doesn't really need a nuclear program.
Mhm.
It has plenty to be able to if you manage those correctly, it could be, a major country for power. I mean like power as in electricity and whatnot. So I mean, that is, I think it's a very clear roadmap ahead, and I hope that we will be able to build that. The other thing is Iran has the greatest brain drain in the world. So just imagine if the people of Iran, both those who are being suppressed internally and those who have escaped Iran over the years, are able to return and serve their own people. I think that Iran will flourish really fast. Um, right now, we are very concerned about the infrastructure that is being destroyed because rebuilding that's going to take time.
Yeah.
But I also think that like we had a conference actually in December, and there were many prominent Iranians from the diaspora in attendance, people who have had great accomplishments. People who have, you know, one of them had like about 170 patents under his name, and he's, or someone else who was heading one of the departments in NASA, and these are all people who just imagine one day one of them who is the head of like the research center for in Scandinavian countries. So just imagine if these people actually are able to come and serve their own people. I think that, and that's something that they were discussing there. They were like, we intend to come and just dedicate our, you know, li- whatever is left of our lives
Knowledge. Yeah.
to this cause and to be able to do that pro bono for our country because that's been our wish from day one, but we were
Mhm.
denied being able to serve our own people. And so there's nothing that we want more than to have that opportunity to go and actually do this for our own country and be able to build our own country with our own hands. So I
Yeah.
think that that's a very beautiful future that Iran can have.
Yeah, having the ability and ownership of your future, your destiny, your path, is important. And I hope all the things that you said come to pass. I want to fast forward. Um, so they tell me not to look forward a lot of times. Stay more in the present, but I want to go 20 years from now. Um, and when hopefully you have the democracy that you so desire, looking back at this moment, looking back at the journey and everything that's led up to this moment, and hopefully that time period in the next year happens where democracy is in place. What do you hope that people understand around the world, that they may be missing right now? What do you hope that they understand looking back 20 years from now?
I think that probably the path forward is usually for a lot of times it's going to be it's going to have there are going to be a lot of obstacles along the way. It's not something that's, easily done, but not to ever give up. Um, and to understand that these complexities, it's not that none of it is in vain. It's all leading up to that point. Like, for instance, you can't say today the Iranian regime is in this weakest position, you know, that this attack was carried out without understanding that this has been a process from 1981 till today, that the regime has reached this you know, to its weakest point. Um, it's not only because of, like, for instance, foreign intervention or whatnot. I mean, the international community, they've the Iranian regime has been committing these crimes for generations and decades. That did never brought retaliation against it. What has led the international community to understand where we are today? Well, that has been the efforts of the Iranian people in revealing the regime's true colors, and actually standing and continuing to stand and to show that the people of Iran want change and they want to be able to create that destiny themselves. So I think it's an evolving process. It's this is how society evolves. This is evolution. And it's really important to take that into consideration. So don't think, first of all, don't expect you know, fast turnaround of, results. But also don't give in and don't give up and don't think that, it's pointless or it's useless. Um, I've heard for many years from many Iranians that, you know, was it worth it? All of these years you gave your entire life practically for this cause, and what has come from it? People are still, in fact, some of the people who used to be very, strong in opposing the regime, because they got just tired of how extensive it became, they started, putting that aside to be able to travel back to Iran and see their families and their loved ones and whatnot. So people see that empty side of that cup, but the reality is that this is this is the nature of fighting a very complex regime. And to be honest, I think this is one thing that probably history will attest to. Maybe we can't speak about it right now. Um, but I think that if we didn't have the resistance that we have had in the past 4 decades against this regime was a regime that was going to become, that Islamic State that Khomeini had, you know, doctrined and was planning. And this regime could have ruled for like another 500 years and would have ruined the world. The only thing that has stopped it has been the people of Iran, really, over these decades, and with
Mhm.
their understanding and understanding how complex this regime is and why it's important to stand in front of this regime. I mean, the people of Iran realize that this regime has to be overthrown and there's no such thing as reform within this regime only 2 years after it came into power. So
Mm.
June 20th, 1981 was that turning point, and the people of Iran realized then that armed resistance in face of this regime is going to probably be the only way forward. Um, and, having that understanding in such a short period of time, I think that was incredible. Um, and now we are seeing that, unfold, and people are starting to realize it at a much broader level.
Gotcha. I do want to thank you for coming back so quickly to share your perspective. It's a very difficult, very uncertain, emotional is probably the word. I'm searching for a different word, but emotional comes to mind. Just heavy is the word I was thinking of. Heavy moment. And so I do want to thank you for coming back so quickly to share your perspective. As always, before I let you go, I do want to give you an opportunity to speak on anything or share anything, and particularly I'll inject something into your thoughts. For those who are watching or listening to this who want to help or lend assistance to the resistance and the Iranian people, what can they do?
Well, I think we touched on this last time, but raise awareness, one, try to be informed, two, and three is wherever you go, and no matter what capacity, it might be speaking with friends, it might be, at your workplace, wherever, share this message with them that, the people of Iran don't want a war, but they also oppose appeasement. They think that they need to be able to create that change for it to be a stable change. And also, share the tempering plan, talk about it, learn about it, and, you know, show that, roadmap that Iran could have a bright future ahead, one where it is in harmony with the world and with the region, and hopefully a stabilizing force instead of a destabilizing force. And that the people of Iran, they have that capability and that capacity to bring about that change. You saw how the youth of Iran, um, they really took all risks and came to the streets to stand in front of this regime. So they understood the price that needs to be paid for freedom in Iran. But we are willing to pay that price, but still, we don't want it to be through foreign intervention and war because that's not to the benefit of anyone. We don't want troops on the ground. We don't want U.S. tax dollars to be used for, to used for war on Iran. We have we want to take that into our own hands and to be able to bring about that change.
Absolutely. Well, Zolal, again, thank you for stepping in Dave's head and providing the perspective. I'm really hopeful that uh, this war ends soon and the people of Iran, the Iranians, can get the democratic republic or democracy they so desperately want, and the end of a regime that has terrorized and suppressed and oppressed the people of Iran, excuse me. And so that was my wish and that was my hope. And I hope that those things come to fruition. So thank you again for stepping in, Dave said.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure to be with you.
War has a way of collapsing complexity into headlines and slogans. But behind every missile launch, cut, scrap that, scrap that, scrap that. Take two, take two. War has a way of collapsing complexity into headlines and slogans. But behind every missile launch and every military briefing are real people, families, communities, and futures that will never be the same. What makes this moment especially complicated is the contrast between rhetoric and reality. The American public was told repeatedly that the goal was to avoid new wars. Voters were warned, almost fearmongered, or not almost fearmongered, actually fearmongered, that electing other leaders, i.e., Kamala Harris, would send their sons and daughters into conflict. Yet here we are again, with U.S. troops already killed and the possibility of a wider regional war growing by the day. These are the moments that citizens need to slow down, ask hard questions, and insist on clarity and truth rather than fear. Because patriotism should never require silence, and leadership should never require blind agreement. Zolal, thank you again for helping us understand this moment from the perspective of the Iranian people. And to everyone watching or listening, stay informed, stay thoughtful, and take care of each other. To the Iranian people and innocents everywhere, you're in my thoughts, and I'm hopeful for the swift end to not just this war, and not just all wars, but oppression everywhere. It seems and feels a little malapropos, but I say this at the end of my guest segments, and in the special edition, I'll say it here, but it feels a little malapropos. May every today be the best day of your life. And I hope that for Zolal, the Iranian people going forward, and everybody across this globe. So thank you, Zolal, for stepping into Dave's head. And thank you for stepping into Dave's head. Until next time, make sure to get your daily dose of perspective and always be the tone setter in your life. That's all for this episode of Dave's Head. If you enjoyed this episode, I'm sure you'll love similar content in the Alive Podcast Network app. Plus, you can support this podcast and enjoy ad-free listening to nearly 100 other Black-hosted podcasts. Download the iOS or Android app, become a member, and experience unlimited access to Black-hosted content week after week. Follow, like, and or subscribe to this podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and or X at Dave's Head Pod, and on YouTube at Dave's Head Podcast. For more information and links to all things Dave's Head, check out our website at daveshead.card.co. Episode premiere on the second and fourth Fridays of the month. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, enjoy life, because life should be fun. Take care.